Hey everyone. Hopefully I got this set up correctly and you can hear me. Unfortunately, there's a horrible delay with the software I'm using. So your comments are on like 20, 30 seconds later than me. But if you comment that you can hear me, that would be very helpful. Or if you can't hear me or see me, let me know. It does say that I'm live though, so hopefully that's true. While I'm waiting, I just wanted to say, over reading some of these comments, it's pretty crazy what time it is for a lot of you. And going forward, I'm definitely flexible on what time we do these live streams. But 3 in the morning in India, apparently, that is very late. So good evening, good night, good morning. Thanks for joining. And it looks like everyone can hear me. So unfortunately, as I mentioned, there's a delay here I've got to figure out for the next one of these live streams. It's very odd being on a delay and not being able to interact directly with people. But welcome to everybody who's here. I sent out a form to collect some questions a couple weeks ago, or last week, I guess, and we got a ton of questions. So we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we spent some time going over them, trying to figure out common questions, common themes. And I guess, where should I start here? One thing that definitely has come up pretty frequently is, this is a bit of a sad note to start on, but Rusty, my dog, unfortunately, is no longer with me. He got really, really sick with this very rare immune disease, and I actually had to put him down. There was no cure except to give him blood transfusions every couple of days, which is very expensive and very painful for the dog. So we had to put him down. It was very sad. And I wasn't sure if I should, tell everybody that, because it's a big bummer to send a course announcement about. So I kind of just stopped mentioning Rusty because I figured that would be better than having to tell everyone that he was dead. Unfortunately, though, that's the real story. So that's why Rusty has not made an appearance, unfortunately, in any videos. It was, that was not great. I do have 2 cats at this point, and I have 6 chickens, and I'm thinking about getting another dog. The truth is, I got Rusty when I should not have had a dog. I was like 18 or 19, living in a very tiny apartment. I did not have really a lot of money to pay for any vet bills or anything. So he was a great dog, but it was not really responsible at the time. And it ended up working out. But now, I don't live in the city anymore. I've got a yard. I can have a dog. It's definitely easier. So I'm thinking about getting another dog. That's the short story there. Okay. So, actually, here's one of my cats. Oh, she's stuck. Here she is. She'll say hi briefly. So, you're not Rusty. Not quite the same, but still an animal. And I guess we'll start now with the more technical stuff. So again, I got tons and tons of questions. There's no way that I can answer all of your questions. And there will probably be multiple of these sessions and multiple forms to get your questions. So please don't take it personally if we don't get to your question, because odds are that we're just not going to. We got just today a couple hundred questions, and over the last week or so, it's just hundreds and hundreds of questions. So it's a full-time job just to go through them. Okay, so the first one here is from a Neville Gosh. I'm also very sorry in advance for mispronouncing any of your names. So his or her question is, how many hours should we put in a day to learn programming? That is a very difficult question to answer with a specific answer, but I would say it depends on what your goals are. The last thing I would recommend is for somebody to just go very intensively at home on their own, cramming programming into their brain all day, every day for like 3 months straight. Unless you really enjoy it, that's a good way to just get burnt out. For me personally, when I'm learning something new, a new framework, a new language, whatever it is, I don't know, spending all that time on one thing, even if you enjoy it, is an easy way to fall out of love with it. So what I recommend is to have some structure for yourself. If you know what works best for you. Are you better learning in the morning, in the evenings? Are you better sort of spending a large chunk of time at once on something, or is it better to break it up? For me personally, I wouldn't spend more than, 4 hours a day focusing on programming. unless you have a specific deadline, a specific goal that, you want to put all of your time and effort into. But if you've got other stuff going on, like you're raising kids, or you have a relationship, or you have work, there's all these other things that people forget to talk about when they're telling you that you should be spending all day programming. I think that's great if you can spend all day, but it's not what I would advise to everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. But if you're starting out, you've got to put in a couple of months at least to make some progress. It's going to be slow at the beginning, then it will speed up, and then it's going to feel slow again as you get to the harder stuff. So I don't know, have some structure. That's the main piece of advice I would have. The next question here is from Hans. That's all I have. Hans, no last name. Should I learn full stack development or just focus on front end or back end development as a beginner? This is a really good question. The truth is that the term full stack these days is kind of best, it's out of fashion. Worst, it's taboo. It had this crazy rise where everybody wanted to talk about full stack development and how, you should only hire full stack developers. And then there was an equally crazy fall of people saying that there's no such thing as a true full stack developer. You're always going to be better at one thing or another. And by trying to hire full stack developers, you're actually just encouraging people to spread themselves thin and to not have a deep level of expertise. So there's lots of think pieces and blog posts about this. But what I will say is that in general, the last time that I looked into this, and I'm not an expert on what job listings are changing or what they're looking for day to day, but in general, front end and back end roles are still existing roles, and they're going to stay that way. You might see full stack mentioned in listings, but a lot of people are pulling back from using that. So when you start out, though, the trouble is that it's kind of hard just to learn front end or just back end. You kind of need to have a full understanding of all the pieces, at least a basic understanding of how everything fits together. Full stack, if you want to call it full stack, but you're not going to be an expert in every piece. You're then going to spend more time on the front end or on the back end. And really within that, you're going to spend more time on like one or two things on the front end or one or two things on the back end. So specialization is important, but I would recommend that everybody gets that broad understanding of how the pieces fit together. Because if you just start out doing full front end and you go crazy running right towards React and Redux and whatever else you're learning, that's great. But if you're unable to build an API and you're unable to understand authentication and to just have sort of your own backend and deploy it, that can severely hinder what you're actually capable of building on your own. So I would definitely recommend if you find yourselves gravitating towards one, go with that. But I think in general, it's pretty hard to start out picking front end or back end before you actually learn a general broad set of knowledge around the full stack. But yes, a lot of people don't like that term full stack. You can read all sorts of opinions on that online. Next question here. This is from Elliot. How much CSS should a web developer know? Oh, actually, sorry, that's from Stacy. And then a second similar question. Where can I learn quick CSS tips? So first of all, how much CSS should a developer know? That is a hard question to answer. It depends on what you're doing. It ties into the previous question. I think everybody should know some basic stuff. There's a lot that you could, I like CSS, and there's still so much I honestly know nothing about in terms of making really fancy animations and really smooth effects. I read tutorials, I read even books and YouTube videos that are published on the topic, and still sometimes I'm blown away by what people do with CSS. But I think everyone should be able to get the basics down. That is very different than saying everybody needs to be a designer or everybody needs to have a design sense. That is a completely separate skill set, and most people just have one. So you're lucky if you're a designer and you happen to know how to make things come to life through code. So I would say learn some CSS, but I wouldn't go crazy about it. The basics are easy, right? Out of everything there is to learn in programming, I think HTML and CSS are pretty straightforward. There's some logic in CSS, but a lot of it is kind of just copying and pasting different properties. And then for Elliot's question, where do I learn or where can you learn quick CSS tips? Actually, what I like to do is just copy people on CodePen. Look at the curated lists of cool CodePens, CSS tricks, that sort of thing on CodePen. There's all these collections. And then you can just fork something and tweak it and try and understand how it works. That's what I do. And I'm always, very frequently blown away by what I see on there. People are doing some really crazy stuff in a good way. Next up here, let me just take a look at the comments. I think we're up to like a 30-second delay. Some people have recommended, CSS Zen Garden. What else do we have in here? CSS tricks. As CSS changes, I mean, that's a question that we'll address later, but things change all the time, obviously, in web development. And as some of these new properties and features come in, and new tools that people use to work with CSS, like somebody mentioned Houdini, there are some other pretty exciting things on the horizon that I can't really speak much about personally, other than the fact that I've read 1 or 2 blog posts about them. So I'm no expert there, but there's a lot of exciting things coming up, not just with CSS. We'll talk more about JavaScript trends and all of that in a bit. Okay, next really quick question from Robin, or I'm not sure if it's a typo. It's either Roybin or Robin. Not really programming related, but I was wondering if you make the graphics for my courses and YouTube thumbnails myself. I do. It takes me forever, and I drive myself insane trying to tweak them. I use software called Canva, Canva. It's basically fancy version of or a dumbed down version of maybe Photoshop and PowerPoint and a couple of other things put together. There's like stock images that are loaded into the app. So I kind of just drag and drop and change colors. And honestly, I spend forever making the thumbnails, and I don't do it deliberately. Every time I tell myself, limit this to an hour. Nobody cares what it looks like. And then it's like 5 hours later and it's 3 a.m. and I need to go to bed. So I use that software called Canva. It's free. And I think, they generally look good. Okay. Next question here. Can you give us some idea about what major changes might happen in JavaScript programming in the near future? How does it affect job seekers? And this is from a Mirage Ahmed or Miraz Ahmed. I'm really sorry. I'm sure I've butchered everyone's names. But this is a really good question and also one that's hard to give a definitive answer on. But what I can say for sure is that JavaScript is definitely here to stay. And part of one thing I need to address that I have seen lots of comments about and that I want everybody to know about is that I'm currently wrapping up a complete overhaul of my main web developer bootcamp on Udemy. And that overhaul, the new curriculum, I mean, every single video is completely new from scratch. It's been quite the undertaking. Anyway, every video on there reflects what I'm about to say, and so this is where I'm coming from when I talk about what I think the future is directly rooted in a bunch of the research and the videos I've been recording recently, and also for the Springboard course that I published earlier this year, the the online programming bootcamp that's sort of a next step up from a Udemy course. So the things that I would pay attention to. JavaScript, absolutely, but not just JavaScript, modern JavaScript, using all the latest syntax, making sure you're comfortable with things like, async functions and working with promises and some of the new syntax improvements with spread and destructuring and all of that. And then JavaScript frameworks are not going to go away. As much as I wish it would be easier to point to one, obviously React is here. TypeScript is something that's I wouldn't say it's on the horizon at this point. It's here, and a lot of companies are using it. The problem with TypeScript, really, from an educational point of view, is that you have to be a JavaScript expert first to really get anything out of TypeScript. It doesn't make a lot of sense just to start teaching TypeScript to complete beginners. But I would say that TypeScript is absolutely worth people learning if you get to that point of conquering JavaScript. And then a framework that I really personally like and that I've been using pretty frequently in the last couple of months is Svelte. If you guys have heard of that, I'm sure some of you have. Svelte. So I really enjoy that. I enjoy Gatsby as well. Those are two tools that I can't predict, how long they'll be around and what their rise will look like. But I imagine they're going to continue to get more popular. So those are just some, guesses from my perspective in terms of Gatsby and Svelte. But React is definitely here to stay. JavaScript's here to stay. In general, those are the things I would focus on. I'm sure there's going to be bigger changes that I don't foresee. I'm not in any way, an expert forecaster or an oracle around this. But the good news is you just need to learn to code. And if you know JavaScript front to back, whatever comes your way a year from now or 5 years from now, you're going to be in the same boat as everybody else who is a professional developer who has to learn that tool. So I have friends who I talk to right now who are working remote developer jobs from home, and they've been spending weeks learning Svelte, and some of them have been learning Gatsby. And that's kind of why, it's been on my mind recently is I've heard from a couple of people who are learning those tools, and, they go through the same process. They know JavaScript. They may have learned a framework in the past, or some of them started out with Backbone years ago, and then that turned into Knockout, and that turned into Ember, and then that turned into Angular, then that turned into React, and now it's turning into Svelte. And that's just part of the journey. Like they don't complain. Well, maybe they do complain, but they don't have fear of having to pick those things up. So all I can really say is that there will be some major changes. I don't know what it will be. It will be JavaScript heavy. TypeScript, probably not a bad idea. And then I like Gatsby and Svelte, but who knows what it will actually look like in a couple of years. Okay. Okay, here's another question. How's Rusty? How are my chickens? I'll talk about my chickens really quickly. It's a little break here. My chickens are good. They are very good. We had a pretty extreme heat wave here, and also a lot of fires going on right now. So it's really smoky outside, and my chickens are actually really not happy about that. I've never had chickens before, but they show you very clearly if they're distressed. They just keep their mouth open or their beak open, and it sounds or kind of looks like they're gasping. It's kind of alarming. So I've been running up and down my hill trying to get to the chickens every couple of hours to make sure, they've got enough cold water and all of that. But other than that, until this week, everything's been great. I raised them from chicks, and they were a type of chicken where you can't actually tell if they're going to be hens or roosters when they're born, which is for hundreds of years, that's how it's worked. And then more recently, there's been these fancy factory farm breeds where they can just quickly tell if something's going to be a hen or a rooster right when it's born. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, I ended up with a lot of roosters, like more than 80% roosters. So I have been working to rehome a lot of those roosters. I can only have one right now because they fight. They get very aggressive. So that's been a learning experience. But I've got 5 hens right now and one rooster. Anyway, that's a little chicken tangent. And we'll go back to coding now. Okay, how about I am 30 years old and I have basic programming skills. I can code a very simple web page. Is it too late for me to start web development and get a job? And this is from Zivko Stoikev. Again, very sorry about the butchering of your name. This is a question I get a lot. And honestly, 30 years old is really on the low end of the other ages people ask me about. It might be 40 or 50 or 60. I think I've mentioned this a couple times in some of my interviews. I had a couple students back when I was teaching at Galvanize years ago in an in-person boot camp who were in their 70s and early 70s, to be fair. But they ended up picking things up very, very well. Once, we had to make sure to admit them to the program, they had to be very comfortable working with a computer. That's honestly the biggest hurdle that I find with some older students, not 30 years old, but, 50, 60, 70 years old. It's just the computer literacy, but being able to program and get the logic, get the syntax, I really don't think there's any hurdles when you're older in terms of being able to pick that up. It's just being comfortable with computers, which younger people tend to be more comfortable with. But if you're 30 years old or 40 years old or 50, it really doesn't matter. It is absolutely not too late. You said I can code a very simple web page. I mean, you've got to start somewhere. That's a good place to start. From there, I assume you're talking about HTML and CSS mostly when you say web page. I would focus and spend a lot of time on JavaScript next. And it's absolutely not too late. I mean, I have multiple students, dozens and dozens of in-person students who change careers 35 or at 40 years old or later. They had kids, their kids went to college, and they were empty nesters. This is a really common story with a lot of the people I've worked with. They're not like 18, 20-year-old college students who are trying to learn to code, although there are a lot of those. There are many students who are older. So it's absolutely not too late. And I do think one thing that unfortunately is a problem with older students, like I'm not 30 or 40 years old, but once you get up to 50 or older in the Bay Area, in startups in Silicon Valley, there still is some ageism around, and I'm not in a position where I can really speak much about it, being on the generally the younger side, and not, I don't know. I have seen some of my students who are older. I've heard stories where they were super qualified for roles, and it took them 3 or 4 more interviews than somebody else who was younger. Let's say they're equally talented. It just took the older students more time, and that was a bummer. Now, with things going remote, I have no idea, what that will mean for hiring, but I can only imagine that some of those cultural biases will go away, or at least be diminished. That's what I would hope. But to answer your question, Zivko, 30 years old, not at all too late. And I would say probably the average age where a lot of my students start learning to code is between 25 and 35. So you're in no means, or you're absolutely not too old. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. Let's see. Hi, Colt. Can you give us your perspective on why you chose Springboard for mentoring? What made you choose them, and what is their track record on providing candidates to land a job? Okay, this is from Paul C. So I don't want to turn this into, a big advertisement for my Udemy courses or for my Springboard bootcamp, but I'll just answer this one quickly. For a long time, I wanted to fully bring an in-person bootcamp experience online. I honestly thought about doing this myself and hiring people to help. So hiring mentors, hiring an admissions team, hiring a job placement team, and people to do mock interviews, setting up the infrastructure. There's just so much stuff. It would be almost impossible for me to bring stuff that I could do in person in a classroom, to bring it online. Even if I felt comfortable doing the teaching and the exercises and all of that, everything else is just so much infrastructure and the software you need just to schedule a mentor with and match them with some mentee and have them schedule, a weekly call or something. That's not that easy to build. It takes time, and you've got to test it, and it just costs a lot of money. So I ended up partnering with Springboard. I did talk to a couple of other companies that do similar things, and basically it came down to the fact that Springboard had been doing it for a long time with data science. And at the point where I first partnered with Springboard, I think they had only had one student in their data science program who had not been, who actually got a refund, because there's a money back job guarantee if you don't get a job. So for me at that point, that's when I realized they take it seriously, because there are competitors to Springboard and to my courses, the main course with Springboard, the software engineering career track, that honestly are just about cramming as many students through the pipeline as possible, squeezing them for as much money as possible, and who cares if they get a job or not. And that really honestly pisses me off. I think it's ridiculous. I won't name names, but some of the big players in the online space are just about getting as many people in. They don't even have any sort of real admissions tests. And okay, I'm going on a rant. I don't mean to do that, but it bothers me. So when I talked to Springboard, and the first thing we talked about was how selective, what sort of admissions we wanted, what are the challenges, the algorithms we need students to solve just to get in. That's when I thought, okay, this is actually probably the right sort of partner to move forward with. Anyway, next up, let's see. I have a couple of questions. This is from somebody just named Abdul. First of all, it says, "You're awesome." Thank you. I appreciate that. How do I keep chugging forward after failing a couple of interviews? Yeah. First, as somebody who has been on the failing end of interviews in my life, I know that it's a horrible experience, especially when you get attached to the dream or the idea of working at a company. And when you get excited about it, you start to see yourself there, you meet people on the team, and if you like them, or you start imagining what you're going to do with that paycheck, I've been there before, and I know it sucks. So first of all, just from a psychological perspective, Abdul, keep your head in the game. Don't let it get you down too much, because you probably will have more rejection at some point, just like we all do. It will work out, but at some point you have to get comfortable with just having interviews that don't work out. It happens to the best of us. One of my best friends in San Francisco, who is, since he's remote now, he lives in Idaho, but he got jobs at, he had offers at Uber and where else was he? Uber, Airbnb, Square, Stripe, all in the span of basically a month. But then he got rejected from the company he cared the most about. And I don't want to say which company it was, but it was a far smaller company, one that some of you probably wouldn't even know. It's in the Bay Area. And he was horribly beat up that he got rejected from that company, even though he got amazing offers from some of the biggest tech companies, high paying, exciting roles. He could only focus on that rejection. And, I feel the same way about lots of feedback I get from students. I could get a million positive things and one vaguely negative thing, and that's still going to upset me far more than those positive comments. They don't balance each other out. Unfortunately, it's just a flaw in my psychology. So don't let that be you, okay? Learn from me and try and keep your head up a bit. Know that it's just part of it. Your interviews are so hard to try, both from both sides. It's so hard to learn enough about somebody to see if they're, first of all, talented enough or if they have the right skill set to be qualified. But also, are they somebody you can work with and you want to work with? Can they communicate? And you have an hour maybe in person to try and get that. And these days it's over the internet and it's not easy. And then from the other side of things, you've got to make a case for yourself. You've got to fight for your life, but you've only got a couple of minutes to try and, show off the person you are, show off the teammate, the coworker, and then obviously the developer that you are. So that's not at all easy. And you're going to screw it up just like most people do at some point. And then other times things will just fall sort of in the right place and you'll have an interview you feel good about. And that might not mean you get the job, but still things can go well and you can still find positives from an interview where you don't actually get an offer. And that's happened to me too, where I've had an interview and things felt, like I may get this job, but if I don't, I still really connected with this person. I learned a bit about what works when I'm doing a technical interview. I've learned, definitely not to do this next time. So you take some stuff away. But in the technical or on the technical side, there are a couple things I would do. One, people like to go and buy books, and I have a course on data structures and algorithms, and I've seen students just try and cram that in like a week or maybe a couple of days before an interview. And I really think that's the wrong approach. Most companies, now I can't say this for every company, but most companies are not going to expect you to have come in memorizing every possible data structure. They're not going to ask you to implement Dijkstra's algorithm to find the shortest path between 2 points in a graph. They're not going to ask you to do that from memory. I hope not. If a company did that, I would be very irritated and probably would struggle horrendously with that problem. But that's not a good gauge of your skills. That's a gauge of your memorization abilities. So it helps to be familiar with those things. It helps to have confidence working with them and know it's always great if you know that you've solved something in the past, very similar. Even if you can't remember how, just knowing that you were able to do it a year ago or a week ago is still helpful. And then, you work through it, you hopefully bounce some questions and get some feedback from the interviewer. They might give you some hints. If you're on a whiteboard, you can draw some of that out and start trying to lay out your thoughts and try and get everything in your head into the interviewer's head. And that's the hard part. So I don't recommend cramming. I don't recommend studying. And, it's not that I don't recommend studying at all, but I don't recommend the night before an interview, staying up late, trying to memorize everything in my interviewing course. I think that's detrimental to your mental health and to your restful sleep that you need. And what I would do is spend a little bit every day trying to build longer-term memory around technical interviewing questions and algorithms and build that confidence. That's really the most important part. When you are in an interview setting, it's so easy to clam up and get nervous. But if you have some confidence that you've done something similar in the past or that you feel like you can work through something, even if you get half of it wrong. I mean, I cannot tell you how many of the people I've interviewed, to be fair, I've only interviewed probably 50 to 70 candidates in my entire life. I've hired a lot of teachers, but as developers, let's say 50 on the conservative side. But I've hired many, many developers out of that pool who didn't get the interview question right, who didn't have a working function at the end. That doesn't mean that they, didn't know what they were doing. They just, they don't have time to answer the full question. And some of them just didn't know how to do it. But that's really not what I was looking for. And sometimes you will get people who are really strict and kind of jerks about, what they're trying to test you on, and sometimes it's an ego trip for interviewers, and that sucks. But a lot of the time, people want to see how you handle a problem you don't know. How confident are you as a developer? How do you communicate your skills and your thoughts? So anyway, I have a lot of thoughts about interviewing, but what I would say is mentally don't let it get to you too much. You're going to be rejected at some point. Try and learn something from those rejections, and don't be like me where you get really, really bummed out just from a single negative comment. Next up, don't cram stuff. Don't try and study everything in a data structures textbook and algorithms textbook the night before. That's like a semester of a college class or maybe a year of a computer science degree. That's a lot of content to try and do in a single night. So spread that way out. Okay, next question here. What should we do? Got quite a few about Rusty. Oh, this is an interesting one. How do you balance a passion about programming with other, this person says, extracurriculars during high school? I find myself falling behind on schoolwork due to spending too much time on programming. Now, I heard other variants. This is from Jovan, Xin. Chin. I'm really sorry again about the last name, but Jovan was asking about high school. Jovan. I get similar questions, though, about balancing programming with raising kids or with having a full-time job. There are, lots of permutations of this question. I would say that if you have a passion for programming and you really enjoy it, that is a good place to start. I see a lot of students who I would say, are comfortable spending time programming. They enjoy it to some extent, but it's still considered work for them. And that's nothing, that's not a big issue. A lot of those students still get great jobs, but they view that time that they're programming as their job, as actual work. But if you're somebody who already is talking about having a true passion for programming and you're falling behind on other things because you're spending too much time, I'm not going to recommend that you ignore school and that you ignore getting good grades and all of that stuff if you're in high school. But if you can leave, if you can have some concrete evidence of your passion for programming, if you can make something to show for yourself, that's always impressive. So if you can build an app, whatever it is, a web app, an iOS app, if you can start a little company, or if you don't want to do that, make a game for yourself, or if you can just do anything to really prove to yourself and also to the world that, all that time you're spending on programming is worth it, I think that's a good start. And if you can have a portfolio, you can get a job pretty quickly after high school. But again, my advice is not to ignore schoolwork because who knows, passions change. My passion in high school was music. I went to New York City when I was 18, worked in a recording studio. I thought that was going to be my life and I was set. That was 100% what I was passionate about. And then I got there and started working and completely hated it. I still liked the music and the producing music, but I hated the life of working in a studio. So that's just to say that in my experience, I'm not that old yet, although I'm getting up there. But I still remember being 18 and being very passionate about something. And personally, my interest did change over the years. So I wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. But also, if you are going to put eggs in a basket, make sure it's a really impressive basket and very impressive eggs, and make something with that passion. Okay, next up. How do you go about building a resume as a self-taught web developer? This is from Brian Bozigian. Okay. That's a good question. So you're probably not going to, it depends on your background. If you're young, you don't have much work experience, technical or not. So if you're a self-taught web developer, it depends on, what you were doing beforehand. Were you in the military? Were you working in HR? Were you, marketing, doing something else? If you feel like there's something worth putting on your resume there, I would still flesh out an accurate resume of, what your life has been up to in the last couple of years prior to applying for a role. But what really matters is what you can show for your technical skills. So the most important thing is at least one impressive project. And this is a big trend in these questions I got. Lots of people asking about, what can I put in my portfolio? What should how many projects do I need? Where can I get project ideas for a portfolio? How good of a project do I need to get a job? Those are all sort of connected questions around having something to demonstrate to people. Please take me seriously. I actually know this stuff, because, if you're self-taught, you're learning from a course like the courses that I have, that's not enough to just tell somebody, hey, I took this Udemy course. It's not enough to say that I watched videos on YouTube, right? You've got to have something. Once you get that first job as a developer, then from there, you don't really need an amazing portfolio. I mean, it helps. It can certainly get you better jobs and make better salary and speaking opportunities. But just to get in the door at your very first role, you've got to have some sort of kick-ass project. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be revolutionary. It doesn't have to be the first amazing idea that nobody else has ever thought of. In fact, I've seen lots of students get paralyzed, not physically paralyzed, mentally paralyzed, trying to come up with the perfect idea that nobody's done, something that they can go and get money for, and they can get funded, and it's going to blow away all these companies. If you are somebody like that and you have a great idea, run with that. But I recommend just pick something and get started. You're not trying to demonstrate that you're some genius creative thinker who is a visionary. You're trying to demonstrate that you can actually make something. Because when you're actually working in, your developer role, if they hire you, most of the time, they're not going to ask you to come up with some amazing new idea and build an app from scratch. They're going to tell you, hey, here's the 20 features we need to work on. You don't have as much, you're not thinking about and coming up with ideas professionally. You're just implementing something. That's not to say it's not a creative job, but my main advice is pick something and get started. So I wouldn't start right away. If you're learning web development and you're new, I think some students try and start working on a project as soon as they get HTML, CSS, and the basics of JavaScript down. What you have to remember is whatever you make at that point, in a week's time, let alone a month's time, you're going to look back and realize that it was terrible. Not because you're terrible, but that's just the progression. You're learning things so quickly, where you just start out with JavaScript, the things you do, the mistakes you make, the organizational patterns of your code that you use, you look back at them a couple weeks later, you'll learn a whole new set of patterns and new syntax, and you'll just be a better developer. So that's not to discourage you from building something when you're starting out, but I wouldn't start something, after your first week or two of JavaScript, because it's going to be bad and you're going to have to redo it. So make something, and that's the best way to learn. So continue to make projects, but don't insist upon your first project being your amazing portfolio project that you're going to send to companies. And then another thing that comes up is styling. I know a lot of people are not CSS experts, or they don't like CSS, they don't like design. That shouldn't be a problem. What I would do is make something that looks good no matter what, but you can buy templates for $5 online, or there's plenty of free templates. If you want to go above and beyond, if you have a developer friend, a designer friend, have them design a front end for you. But you don't have to come up with it yourself. You can copy an existing UI some other application or website's made. You can straight up copy all their styles. Now, you shouldn't do that if this is something you're trying to make money with and something that you're going to turn into a real full-blown application. But if you're just making a portfolio project, there's nothing really wrong in stealing styles and copying, especially if you can offer, I shouldn't offer any legal advice because I don't really know, but those styles are out there for anybody to look at, right? Let's just leave it at that. So don't panic about that. It might be painful if you're not a designer or a CSS savvy person, but unfortunately, whatever you make needs to look good. That's just the reality, right? If an employer or prospective employer is just looking at 10 different apps from self-taught web developers, and one of them really stands out, it's just very polished, and it looks great. It has, it handles errors well. It gives users feedback. It feels like a real app. That is going to be the person probably that sticks out first. So you might have some technically amazing app, but if it looks like garbage, it's unfortunate. But honestly, I think for a lot of people, that's kind of a deal breaker. So pick something and get started with it. That would be my main advice. It's going to take you a lot longer than you think to make something that you feel good about. I see a lot of people spend a week on a project and assume that that's good enough for a portfolio. I would spend weeks, probably a minimum of a month working on a project. and refactoring it and tweaking it. And in terms of inspiration, you can, worst case, just pick an app that's already out there and clone it. Come up with a new twist on the name, a new sort of brand, make Airbnb for dogs, or make Yelp but for campsites, right? Do something that is not reinventing the wheel, where you can just focus on actually building and writing code. So yes, projects, a big point of stress, absolutely. And I was thinking, actually, once I get the live streaming set up where there's less of a delay, because I think we're now up to, I'm looking at the comments here, and people are responding to things I said like a couple of minutes ago, which is, it's a little bit odd for me to try and keep track of what I was saying back then and look at the comments and respond now. But anyway, once I get this software figured out, because I know lots of streamers on YouTube do it, where it's pretty quick and there's low latency. Once I have that figured out, I'd love to do another session on projects and specifically take a look at some of your projects live. I think that would be fun. Some of your portfolios and just open up the chat and actually have like a real-time interaction about it. But for now, that's all I'll say about projects. Other questions here. Let's see. These are from chat now. Similar to what I just said, at what stage of building your portfolio is one job ready? So that's a really hard question to answer with I wish I could have a checklist of here are the 20 things you need to have, 20 things that you can do. It really depends on the job. It depends on the requirements of that role and on what you're interested in. But the minimum for having a job-ready portfolio website or application is to have it look decent. Even if it's a template, even if you stole the styles, it still should look good, as I mentioned. And then behind the scenes, if you're building a full application, this is where it gets tricky, because some people can get a job building a JavaScript game with no backend whatsoever. It might use local storage. Other people will build an amazingly complex backend in Python or in Java or in Node, and it's kind of hard to even know what's going on unless you read documentation, or you make a nice README, or you make a video to explain what your portfolio or what your project is. And that's kind of the difficulty of, making a project. It often favors front-end experts. But at a minimum, I would say you've got to have some sort of database involved in general. These are the requirements I set up for like our Springboard program for students to graduate their portfolio. You've got to have database, authentication, multiple external APIs. You've got to work with Ajax and asynchronous JavaScript. What else do we have in there? In the database, you have to have at least 4 separate tables or entities that are connected. Most students end up working with more than that. And when I say external APIs, that could be something like information about, a weather API, but also it could be Twilio to send text messages or to make phone calls from your app. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and it's hard to come up with concrete guidelines. But in general, those are the things I would say. Some sort of, nice looking front end, a back end in Python or Node or whatever it is, with a real database, deployed, multiple tables in the database, authentication. And then we always get people who break the mold and do something that is pure JavaScript on the front end. And we still approve it if it's complex enough. So it's hard to give you specific, rigid guidelines there. So let me see. A couple of other questions here. Oh, you know what? I forgot to do this. So I've been having some really unfortunate health issues recently. I'm fine for now, but where I've been trying to spend a little bit of time away from my computer, and I've been doing some gardening, and I recently grew this corn here, and I thought everybody would love to see it. Look at those colors. Pink, purpley blue. It's pretty cool. I was pretty excited when I opened this up. I don't know if that color's coming through. Let me get some light on there. Oh yeah, there we are. Look at that. Okay. So I do think, that was kind of fun. That was exciting. And then I've got some pumpkins. No, that's not a pumpkin. That's a winter squash. Here's some pumpkins I've been making some pies out of. I think that's pretty much it. Here's a different pumpkin. So yeah, I've been trying to do some stuff outdoors, as I mentioned. I'm having some really, you probably seen me doing this nonstop. Having some really annoying issues when I type on my computer. Anyway, so that's another break. The chicken break, the cats the corn. Let me get back to some technical questions here. Next up, let's do... This one is an important question. I put in the hours, I buy the courses, I study and practice, but I still can't grasp programming. Is there an aha moment I'm missing, or is it pure dedication? And this is from somebody named Jay Fry. Yeah, this is tricky because in a classroom environment, I'll say this, you have people all in one room learning the same thing at the same time, and you'll see people get it immediately. And, they're strong students, they do well. And then you see other students who are panicked and, not getting it. They can copy what you're telling them to do. They could maybe explain how things work, but they're unable to come up with it on their own or feel like they really grasp everything. And what I've seen is that those students get discouraged easily. Of course, it's frustrating if you see other people in the class doing amazingly well. But I've seen many of those students break through, and actually I've seen a couple literal aha moments, but more often I've seen students who just come in and slowly they get some more confidence and they feel like they're starting to understand it. Part of it is, I think, a mindset of feeling like you have to have an aha moment, or that you have to get every part of programming, which is just not true. Anytime I go to make a course or make an app or anything, the first thing I have to start up and do is just Google the things that I'm going to be working with to refresh my memory, right? I've spent a lot of time in JavaScript land in the past couple of months. I'm overhauling the course, my Udemy course right now, and I had to go back to a Python app a couple of days ago to fix something. And I had to Google a whole bunch of the basic stuff in Python that I 100% had memorized 6 months ago. It's just left my brain for a couple of months, and now I could remember it, and probably for another week or two. But so there's this idea of having to just know everything, and that's intimidating. And then also, it really does come down to practice. I wouldn't say pure dedication. Pure dedication won't get you there. Just watching videos or courses and copying code. It has to be through building things. So watch a video on a course, or watch, intro to JavaScript stuff about how to write functions and DOM manipulation or whatever it is. And you might build a project. In my course, it might be the same thing. You might build a project too, and you kind of code along. But then you've got to stop and build something else on your own. Or do something, recreate what you just built, but without the video telling you what to do. Because being led by the hand, sort of line by line, type this, then type this, that's just a recipe for making something interesting, but not necessarily understanding it. And honestly, looking back in my early Udemy courses, there's a lot of that, because there's not a whole lot that I can do other than suggest that students follow along, or that students pause and take something and do it on their own. And that's kind of all I can do on Udemy. With Springboard, we have a whole different set of, what we can and can't do, where we can, literally review your code, and we can check, we can give you a hard assignment and ensure that you're going to do it, right? There's not a solution out there that you can just watch and sort of copy. With Udemy, I don't have those same tools at my disposal, but in redoing the course that I'm wrapping up right now, in the next couple of weeks, I'm editing everything, and it's always a nightmare at the end. It's like 800 videos I have to go through and edit and upload and label them and drag them around. It takes a long time. But anyway, as I'm redoing it, there's lots of these opportunities where I'm just thinking like, yeah, I guess if I need to treat this as if I'm doing it in person, and just tell students straight up, you need to pause, please, if you're taking this seriously, and don't code along with me, but I'm going to give you the code along because I want you to know how to do it, but please don't just go through the videos and just copy everything, because that's the easy thing. And I do it too sometimes. I'm lazy. I just want to make something in a new language. I don't know much about the language. Let's just, follow along. I'm going to type with that video. But a lot of the time I finish that and then I look up and I'm like, what does that part even do? I don't remember. But if you don't have that video, you stop, you spend the time on your own to Google it. It will take you a lot longer, but you're definitely going to remember a lot of it, and you're going to have a much better understanding of how it all fits together. And then the side question to that, the overhaul of the Web Developer Bootcamp. I will have probably a separate live stream to answer questions about, when that will be in the first week of October, most likely, when it's actually live. But the main question I've seen recently is around how that's going to affect people who are currently taking the course. That's a really good question. What I'm planning on doing for now is just keeping the current content in the course and just calling it legacy section and phasing it out over probably a couple of months. So it will be at the end of the course, and then all the new content will be at the beginning. The big issue I may run into is the maximum number of lectures allowed on Udemy. So worst case, I might just have to make it a downloadable course or host it somewhere else, but I'm not just going to delete everything that's up there now. So if you're halfway through. But also, if you are halfway through, it would definitely be to your benefit to take the new course too, because it's not, there's nothing in there that is, at odds with what the course currently teaches. The course has been updated just very piecemeal. It was my first online course, and I just didn't understand that it's a horrible idea to not make your course in such a way that you can easily update things, as they come and go and fade away. And I've now done it in such a way where it will be much easier to update without having to do like little, text lectures and notes. And it was kind of a nightmare. So the good news is, it's going to be much easier to stay on top of and keep up to date. But if you're in the course right now and you're like learning Express, the new course is still covering Express. It's just now Express 4 and Express 5 Alpha, where everything's done with async functions and promises, and the syntax is different, but you're still learning the same thing. So it would be to your advantage to also check out the new content. And what I'll probably do is make a little guide for people who have finished the first course or who are, part of the way through it, to let them know, here's all the new stuff. Like, you don't need to relearn JavaScript if you already know it. But here are the topics that I didn't cover in the first course that I have now covered in the updated version. So I'll try and make that clear. But again, I'll have a lot more information about that in the next couple of weeks. I kind of have to get back to editing and finishing all that up and uploading before I can tell you exactly how it's going to work. And I think, at this point, I'm pretty much done for now, but maybe I'll do one or two more questions here. And then I know there's a lot of people who have questions in the chat. Just want you to know that we are going to monitor and take those questions and add them to this document. So I cannot guarantee that everyone will get a question answered next time, right? There's been at this point over 1,000 questions that we've been asked. So I'm sorry if you didn't get your exact question asked, or even just a general question in the same category as yours. I want to offer more opportunities for students to ask questions. I also want to definitely get this latency thing figured out so that I can see responses to me when they're happening or when I'm talking about a topic. Anyway, one more question here about a tech stack. This is kind of similar to what we were talking about, projections for the future. This person's asking, if the MERN stack, the mean stack, will get them a job quicker than other stacks, and what stack will be in demand for the next 10 to 15 years. That's, I said a million times to every question. That's a hard question to answer. I feel like a broken record there. This is hard because it really depends on the market where you live. By the way, this is asked by an Aditya. Anyway, it depends on the market where you are and what people are hiring for and sort of the trends locally. But in general, it gets at a bigger question, which is one of the frustrations I personally have noticed with students over the last 8-9 years I've been doing this stuff, is that people come in expecting that they have one stack they need to learn or one tool they have to learn to get a job. And they focus on that one thing. They get a very solid skill set in that sort of one stack, let's say the mean stack. And then they're only applying for jobs and sort of keeping they're limiting their options early on to the mean stack or to MERN or to whatever other stack is out there. You've got to start with something, and I definitely don't recommend people jumping around and doing React and then Angular and then Vue and then something else. You pick something. So sure, pick React. Personally, that's what I prefer. I'm not saying that there are more React jobs. Last I checked, it's pretty much neck and neck with Angular. But anyway, you pick something and you stick with it. But you have to go into it with the understanding that you might actually not be using React in a job. or if you're learning Angular, you might not be using Angular in whatever job you end up in. And you might be using it at the beginning, like some of my friends I mentioned early on in this session were hired as React developers, but their company in the last couple of months has asked them to learn Svelte, a different framework, and they've had to spend time learning that. So things will change, and I wouldn't pick a stack just to be able to get a job with those exact technologies. Now, I wouldn't do the opposite and pick really weird, archaic languages that nobody is hiring for. But I don't think it makes sense to freak yourself out ahead of time when you're starting out, before you even have a job, before you even really know, how this all works, and before you're an expert in programming. It doesn't make sense to spend a lot of time worrying about what you should be learning and researching and making lists and reading blog posts, because once you get to a certain point where you learn Express and you learn React, well, you could then, if you master them well enough, you could go over to Django and Python and pick that up much quicker and much more confidently than you would have from the very beginning. So you learn that first language, that first backend framework, the first JavaScript framework, that enables you to then hopefully pick up other similar tools much faster. And in 5 years, whatever you got a job for today or whatever you learned in a course today, you probably won't be using. Although you'll probably still be using JavaScript. It just won't be exactly the same language it is now. And you'll probably be using some framework that doesn't yet exist. So don't tie yourself too much to some idea of a stack that you read about or that you think you must know. The most important thing is going to be, in terms of getting a job, is just demonstrating that you can make something. So that could be with Python and with a JavaScript front end. That could be Java and JavaScript. It could be the MERN stack, the mean stack. I wouldn't care if I was hiring, and a lot of companies won't, for entry-level jobs. They're not expecting you to be an expert in something. They don't necessarily have the same requirements as a principal React engineer or a senior Java engineer. They're going to assume you're an expert in Java. But a lot of these entry-level programming jobs, they just want to know that you're an expert in, well, I shouldn't even say an expert. They want to know that you are talented and that you can make things work and put the pieces together, and that you're capable of learning whatever they need you to learn. Anyway, I am going to hop off now. It's been an hour. I'm happy to do some more of these. I'll, leave comments and all that if you found any of this useful or a waste of your time. Just remember, one negative comment ruins my day, ruins my year, my entire year. I'm kind of kidding. But it was great talking at all of you guys and gals and everybody who's joined. Again, I'd love to do this in the future where I can set up some lower latency stuff and actually interact with you, because it is very odd looking at the responses coming in now. But anyway, I'm going to hang up and end the stream. I hope everyone's doing well. Hope you're all staying safe wherever you are in the world. It's amazing to see where some of you are coming from and what time it is there. So get some sleep if you're in India and it's 4 a.m. or something now. Get some rest, and I'll be up with some new content shortly, and the update to my web developer course in the next couple of weeks. It's kind of an all-out sprint to do that, and then another stream I'll announce sometime in the next couple of weeks as well. All right, bye everyone. Great talking to you.